million. Well, yeah, but why don't we do it in stages? I'm an engineer, so you take and break things up. I finally figured out that's why they do calculus. Didn't know that when I was learning it. In any case, we also put out a magazine which goes out quarterly called Vignettes of Islip Town History. And at the end, if you want to take a look through it, this issue is the latest. There will be one more issue this year, a special issue on the summer interns. We have an intern program. 18-year-olds, they can be interns. And we also, they don't get paid. I tried. And we also have an apprentice program. Kids under 18, teenagers who want to learn how to research. We do have one young woman in that, and she has done some really amazing things for us. So it has been a great experience. So that brings me to the rest of the story. This is the story of the town of Islip, the town that isn't supposed to be. We are not supposed to exist. I will explain that in a minute. So could you please go to the first one? So this is the early history. This is what the town basically looked like. There are sections of the town that still look like this. And as I said, that early history, or how a town came to be without anybody noticing. It's a true story. And by the way, you'll get to know about our town seal at the end, which is also very interesting, because it's not what it looks like. Let's go to the next one. First, I use the word Seekatog here, but there's more arguments. This is the name of West Islip, which is where their main summer camp was. They did not live there in the winter because it was unbearable, but it wasn't too good in the summer either. They were mostly coated with grease and so forth because of the mosquito population. Colonial development, and as well as the native development, was north of what we now know as Montauk Highway, only because you'd be eaten alive down there. We actually have descriptions of what it was like. So in any case, the Seekatogs, because we got enough Seekatog avenues and everything else, we might as well use that for the moment. It means basically black or dark lands. It means the soil was very black and rich because it was a marsh. And there were other villages, one of which is Connecticut, which you know is Connecticut, and it actually is inside the park. We have possibly located it. We know very little about them, other than some minor things left behind. I know that Sandy Brewster Walker has done a tremendous amount of research, and we work with her quite closely. And one of the surprises many people get is because there was so much intermarriage between the African American community and the European community that there are a lot of people who are surprised that they have Native American blood in them that are lived in Islip. Because the other problem we have is, if anybody's ever done any research on Long Island families, God forbid should we use another name. Mine is just as bad. There are so many Georges that at times no one can tell one apart. We're losing those, I'm getting toward the top of the pile now, which is worrying to me. But basically, it's a problem. So to try to tell one Treadwell from another is almost impossible because they live next to each other, they use the same names, and we actually have situations where people in the Clark family, they were born and died on the same day, and they were both named Nathaniel. Basically, their tribe ranged from Swampham's Neck in Babylon to just east of the Yaphank River in Brookhaven. They were expert baymen. Their diet was based on clams, oysters, fish, until the Europeans came, and then they discovered pigs, and we'll maybe talk about that in a minute because that turned into a town disaster. They did live fairly peaceably with European settlers. Yes, there was some enslavement. We're not going to sugarcoat that. But in other cases, they did live side by side, and we now have seen how many of them actually had deeds and property, which, as we do more and more research, it's a surprise. Again, sorting out who's who is part of the problem. Next slide. Connecticut at the Long Tidal River. It does not mean Great River, but it's at the Long Tidal River. It is the same word as the word Connecticut. It's just a different dialect, so it's in Connecticut. Again, it's from the Algonquin, and it goes through. Quinny means long, Turk Tidal River, at. So it's had so many spellings that you should see the records in town hall. Sometimes we don't even know that it's actually the Connecticut River until we start figuring out who lives where and going, oh, that's what they were talking about. Yes, it was the other day somebody complained that we don't seem to have a decent spelling of Snettercourt. The Snettercourts didn't have a decent spelling of Snettercourt. This is like we were discussing Munkenbeck. It's another wonderful name. It has very many origins. Next slide. The origins of Islip and the way it was run and the way it still is run comes down to Charles I losing his throne and his head. The Nicol family, who are going to be the major movers and shakers to the development of Islip, were royalists. They were able to, and again, people were saying, oh, no, we found out that Matthias Nicol, who was the father of William Nicol, who was the person who made the first purchases here of land. Matthias Nicol was a lawyer at the Inns of the Court. That's the highest even today of the British legal system. He was a very skilled attorney. He came from the middle of nowhere in England, but he was a very skilled attorney. And he was a crown favorite. We will see how that plays out in a few minutes. They managed to keep their heads on and keep their heads down throughout this thing, which will explain some of the ways Islip was run, and kind of still run today, because basically Islip was a place, when it was established, it was, I call it the land of broken toys. If you upset people, if you caused a problem in any other town, you'd come to Islip, and as long as you didn't touch anything William Nicol had, they didn't care what you did. He was accused of hiding Scots who had death sentences, which he did. The major religion here for many years was Presbyterian. It was all Scots that were, because they could hide here. First, you couldn't get here from any place. Second, the Nicol family kept a lid on everything. And this is how they survived the Republic. Oliver Cromwell, Lord Protector, Parliament's in charge. We believe William Nicol, who is the founder of Islip, or considered the founder of Islip, was born in 1657, which means at the end of this horrible period in English history. And he's born in Islip, Northamptonshire. Ever wonder where Islip came from? Yep, that's where he got it. He named it after his hometown. And that's Charles with his head still on. And can we have the next slide, please? This is Islip, Northamptonshire, England. Islip, Northamptonshire, England has a population of around 780 or so people versus us with 335,000. So the daughter has outgrown mom. Islip does have at least 2 bar rooms and a workman's club, in case you run out of beer. It is not that big. Apparently the word means slippery slope in ancient Saxon, but we don't know that for sure. That's what they say it means, so I have to go with the Brits. There's also 2 beauty parlors and a nail salon. And that's pretty much the entire town, and a huge cathedral called the Cathedral of St. Nicholas, built by the Nicol family. And there are Nichols buried in there. The reason, and you will find if you try to do any research on the Nichols, you will find that there are more William Nichols than you know what to do with. Reason being, and a similar thing in my own family, the original William Nicol was a hero, and he died in service of the king, so they keep his name alive by naming everybody William. There, I think at one time we counted there were at least 6 Williams in Islip town alone, running loose, all different parts of the family. So that makes it, again, research a little bit difficult. But it is, that's the cathedral, by the way. You can see it's pretty large. Another thing that's interesting is that you'll see in a few minutes they come over here with Colonel Richard Nicholas, who every historian says is not related to the Nicol family at all. Except he's their next door neighbor. Okay. There's a couple other things we have found that aren't true. Please go to the next slide. The kingdom is restored. Charles II becomes king. In 1660, he's proclaimed king in England. He had been king of Scotland since Charles I. If you really want to read some funny stuff, read how the English and the Scots were arguing with each other. Like they locked one head off and the Scots immediately made him the king. So the monarchy's restored. 1663, Charles grants New Netherlands, because England and Holland are fighting each other, to his brother, James, Duke of York. In 1663, they need to form a group to invade New York and take it over for the Brits. And that group wound up recommending by the king one Matthias Nicol, Samuel Maverick, who was the secretary to the king, to the Earl of Clarendon, and one of the Earls of Clarendon later on will become one of the governors who was friendly to the Nichols. He was to be secretary of the commission, in other words, the lawyer in charge of everything. And so that's happened. He was immediately commissioned captain in the Royal Army. Let's go to the next slide. So, Matthias Nicol arrives in New Amsterdam. He arrives in the English fleet to claim New Amsterdam for James, Duke of York, and if anybody remembers their history, if you had New York State history, they come in and Peter Stuyvesant says, you know, everybody man the fort, and everybody's going, are you serious? We hate you. And the Dutch have done nothing for us. Bye. And they welcome in. William is now 7 years old when he arrives. There is a very large family. The mother has just given birth. The whole family comes over. Mother just gave birth to a little girl. William's father decides to go boating in Hellgate. Yeah, I mean, today, you don't even take a powerboat in Hellgate at most times. But he was out with a rowboat. The boat capsizes in the whirlpools because they still had all the rocks and all in there. Dumps everybody out. Little William can swim, and his father can swim. Nobody else can. The entire rest of the family is wiped out except for the mother and the daughter who were on shore, and history does not record what she said to the father when he got ashore. Anyway, the family, now his sister, who will later on become important because of the people she marries and gives the Nicol family, as my grandfather once joked, he says the greatest crop a Long Island family could raise is daughters, because you can marry them off to everybody else and then take them over. And the Nicol girls were pretty much, throughout history, were very much like most of my aunts. They ran everything. So good old Long Island girls. But they went from the Dutch West Indies Company to the English flag, and that was the first flag to fly over the town of Islip. The next slide, please. All right, in 1665, there were all sorts of problems. So they decided to designate towns, which they never really got around to until a little later. And by this point, I want to show you Connecticut. This is Connecticut. The English had intruded on Long Island, but this area in between, nobody was claiming. This is the Dutch lands. So, even though there were English in here, they kind of went along with the Dutch. But out here on the East End, just like today, they didn't get along with the rest of the group. But they broke the island into East Riding, which this is, and West Riding, which this is. That's the original counties, East and West Riding. Again, there were electoral districts and so forth, just like they did in England. But it wasn't working so well. So let's see what happens next slide. Matthias Nicol. It's important that we know what his contribution was, because he has a lot to do with what happens not only in New York, but here in Islip Town. He founded, as I said, a dynasty of service and savvy. These were some of the best politicians and lawyers ever to have existed. They knew how to get things done and not write it down. This is a lawyer to have. He was smart enough when he got here to realize that the real power were the Dutch merchants. The English crown was not powerful. The Dutch merchants were. So he was very close with them, and it will pay off later on for his son. He was named in 1664 the secretary of the Duke of York's expedition into the Netherlands and clerk of the court, which meant he ran the courts. He then became a member and actually head of the Hampstead Convention, and he wrote the Duke's laws. Now, it's important that we also take a look at what was in the Duke's laws. There's a lot of stuff in there that combined the Dutch and the British law into one set of laws written by Matthias Nickel. In there is an important provision that New York was the only state to have. It required every community to have a church. That church was to keep records and various things for the community. But they never said which church. That is the first freedom of religion. He then bought 1,000 acres in a place called, he named it Plandome. Plandome Manor. That's the village of Plandome today. And in fact, his mill is still there. The house was just torn down in the 1990s. It was still there till the 1990s. He, in 1671, became the 6th mayor of the city of New York. He was Speaker of the First Colonial Assembly. And in 1684, he pushed through, in addition to his son, with his son's help, he pushed through a guarantee of freedom of religion for all Christians. That's a start. He dies in 1687. He's buried at Manhasset, Long Island. By the way, his son William will be buried in the family plot there. You can park on it. We believe it's a parking lot in Manhasset. So, you know, kind of like Richard, we can go up there, maybe dig them up and move them to Islip, but I'm not sure that the village of Manhasset would be too happy with us digging up the parking lot. Next slide, please. William grows up. He would have looked like the officer up there in the upper right. He studies law, as you did back then. You studied under a great lawyer, which was his father. And in 1681, he decides to go back to England with Sir Edward Andros, who was the royal governor. At one time, New York and New England had the same colony. We have a seal in the town records that is the colony of New York and New England. It only off and on existed for very short periods of time. From what we know, it's the only seal. We thought it was wax. We were told by Philadelphia they think it's pressed paper. It's this thick. And it's, you can see it if you take the tour. We'll take it out, so let you see it. He had a commission as the rank of captain. I have now confirmed that, but the Royal Army wants money to research it, so I'm not killing myself because I don't have any money. He almost dies there from illness. This is important because this is the first time he comes close to death. He lives through this, comes back home to Islip. Next slide, please. When he returns, he's admitted to the New York bar, which probably isn't that hard since his father was head of the New York bar. And he was appointed clerk of Queens County. Queens County at that time included what we now know as Nassau, Kings, and Queens. They were all, Kings County was separate. Queens and Nassau were the same county. So he has got, it's a pretty big thing. Then he became the Register of the Court of Admiralty, and we're going to come back to this because it's the reason for Islip. In April 1687, he became Attorney General of the province of New York, held it for just a year. May 7, 1688 is when it's annexed again into the Dominion of New England, and the government of the province of New York ceased to exist. This only goes on for a short time. Some other things are starting to happen at the same time. Another slide, please. In 1683, they create counties. Suffolk County is made out of East Riding. There is Huntington. All towns are to go bay shore to shore. They have to do two shores. Huntington, all the way down. Smithtown, all the way down, except this little thing that says Indians. Does anybody recognize what Indians is? That's us.
Yeah.
Brookhaven, Southold, Southampton, East Hampton, Shelter Island. That's what's supposed to happen. Please notice Islip isn't there. Neither is Babylon. They don't exist. They are never meant to exist. Next slide. This is the founding document of Islip Grange, which is our official legal name. Islip Farm. This is November 29th, 1683. By the way, everybody, oh, can we celebrate it on November 29th? Yeah, but that's not really when it happened. We did an article in vignettes trying to explain the calendar. The Dutch kept one calendar, the English kept another calendar, and never the twain should meet until the middle of the 18th century. The dates are all whacked out because the British refused to change to that Catholic calendar. Meanwhile, the very Protestant Dutch did. So the Dutch merchants kept one set of books and the English kept another. This is the indenture printed out that gives the purchase. The governor gave permission for the purchase. And now ask yourself, most of you have gardens and lawns, right? Ever try to grow anything in the land of Islip? Dynamite is needed after about 5 years. The front lawn, my front lawn looks like concrete. It's useless. Why would he want this? Very simple. You see, the Fire Island Inlet breaks through not long after this. It's 2 miles wide. The village, what we know as the village of, or the hamlet of Islip, is a deep water port. They're running a pirate ring. That was #1 reason for the founding of the town of Islip, was it was a great place to bring goods in. Hey, we're still working on it in 1683, but it was a possibility. So in 1684, he will get a patent. Please go to the next one. And the Duke of York then becomes King James II, and he makes New York ruled by New England totally. And his reign isn't all that long. He has the first wife, who is Anne Hyde, has 2 daughters. They're Protestant. He marries a Catholic, becomes a Catholic, and the Brits say, that's it. We've had it. Enough with the Stuarts. You're out of here. So, that impacted New York colony. This is, by the way, his seal back then. So, 1688, everything changes. Let's go to the next slide. The original 5 families. These are the families. The Willets control the land that you know as West Islip and going north. The Van Cortlands own Sagdacost Manor. What's interesting about the Van Cortlands is William Nicol gets married during this time. He marries a woman named Anna Van Cortland Van Rensselaer. She married Rensselaer. He dies. She gets the land away from his brother. She is now the heiress of Albany, Rensselaer, and that entire area up there. She controls it. Under Dutch law, which they're still playing with, she is fully able to inherit. He marries her. Her father died when she was an infant. She was raised by one of the Van Cortlands, I think it's Cornelius of the 3 brothers. We have all their signatures in the archives. But he is here. So that's William Nicol's uncle-in-law. The Willets are his business partners. Gibb is his law partner, also the second man in the piracy ring besides the governor and, of course, William Nicol. And you're most interested in this gentleman, the Mowbray. And there are enough ways to spell Mowbray to start your own country. The Mowbrays bought land from both the Willets and the Van Cortlands, is what is West Bay Shore, Brightwaters, and parts of Bay Shore is their land. We have the original deeds signed by the tribes, and that's the only one of the patents we hold. The rest are still held by the families or in the Brooklyn, or whatever they call the Brooklyn Historical Society this week, because it changes every few years. So those are the 5 families. You know, everybody jokes about the 5 crime families in New York City. That these make them look like they were honest. Go to the next slide, please. Matthias Nickel dies. And William inherits Plandome. He will sell that in 1718 and permanently moves to Islip Grange. But not only does he own Islip Grange, he eventually winds up with 5 patents. He owns 3/4 of what we know as the town of Islip, including the beach and the inlet. Very important reason. Why would you want the inlet? Again, what were they doing for a living? So he also winds up with Shelter Island. For his services to the crown, he's given no man's land in the island off of Massachusetts. And he also owns large tracts in other places, as well as New York City. He owns large pieces of New York City. By the way, when he marries, his wife informed him that he would be Dutch Reformed. Forget your English church, you are now Dutch. And so he is part of the Dutch Reformed Church. He's also an important verger for Trinity Church. His children are raised Dutch Reformed. They are married in Albany at the main Dutch Reformed Church at the fort in Albany. So he owns a lot of property. That's his shield down there. And this is the Nickel family from Matthias, where he went. This is in the cathedral in Islip in England. Next slide. These are the patents. The first one, you know, is East Islip, Great River, and so forth. That's here. Then he gets the second patent on the other side that fills in. This is the Gibbs grant right here. His third patent is out on the beach. His 4th patent is this. Here's Mowbray's patent. Van Cortlandt and Willis. And finally, the 5th patent. This patent is the one that's going to be a problem. You see, that patent is technically in Brookhaven. And there was a thing brought before the Brookhaven Town Council about where that land should be. Well, it was tied. And under the rules, which still exist today, the only time the supervisor gets a vote for real is when there's a tie. Will you be surprised that it's in the town of Islip? Because William Nickel was the supervisor of the town of Brookhaven? The second reason for the town of Islip's founding is to avoid paying taxes. Seems ironic today, doesn't it? But anyway, this is basically what they had, and you can see this little thing here, Lake Ronkonkoma, is ours. Smithtown and Brookhaven have pieces of the shore, but we got the lake, it's ours. They fight over this constantly. They fought over it constantly. There's more law cases over who owns Lake Ronkonkoma. By the way, there is no Princess Ronkonkoma. And the date they give for the white man who threw himself in and drowned and she threw herself in, there wasn't a single white man on the continent at the time when that, according to that story. So I realize it upsets the Ronkonkoma Historical Society every time I say that, but she does not exist. Because the word Ronkonkoma means sandy pond. Even I wouldn't name one of my daughters Sandy Pond. Next slide. All right, Islip is a deep water port. The piracy, what they were doing is 2 things. They would take French and Spanish ships, which probably would have upset the crown a little because we were supposedly at peace, and they would bring them in and strip them in Islip. Then they would send the goods into New York City as landed at Boston. They also had their own ships come in with phony documents that said they landed at Boston and paid the necessary fees. Just so happens that the person who's in charge of the ports, the head of the council, and everybody else who actually signed the papers were in on it. No problem. They went in, and there has been a book which if you haven't read it, you really should. It's called The Pirate's Wife. It is the story of William Kidd from the eyes of his wife. It is written by a historian, it's fully footnoted, and it's readable. which is more than most books that are written by historians. Very readable, reads like a historic novel, but she went and found all this information that we had some of it, and others had all these pieces. But she was running a little shop that was really able to get good prices on goods from Europe, fine European silks and all this other stuff. And she was making a fortune at it. And William Kidd was her third husband. When they got married, they went out and celebrated their marriage by going to watch them draw and quarter the governor, Governor Leisler of the Leisler Rebellion. The man standing next to him was somebody who had been imprisoned by Leisler for a year, William Nicol. A death sentence was passed on Nicol, but they wouldn't sign it because his uncle-in-law, basically his father-in-law, was head of the council, so that wasn't going to happen. The guy imprisoned with him was a fellow named Colonel Bayard. Does that name sound familiar to anybody? Bayard Cutting Arboretum. Wonder why they got that land from the Nicol family before anybody else did. They were very close. They spent a year in jail. Nicol almost dies there. He comes out and he gets back into the court. But they're running quite a good business here. And surprisingly, they've got money, which they didn't have when they started. Let's go to the next slide. Governor Leisler, a little more on our friend Leisler. William Nicol opposed this rebellion. Remember, it's a mess in England. They are going through change of king or queen every few minutes. And nobody knows who's running anything, and the British could care less about the colonies because they're trying to straighten out what's going on at home. So Leisler goes ahead and decides to take over the governorship, and Nicol was told to give up his Justice of the Peace Commission. He wouldn't. Leisler imprisons him with Colonel Bayard. Everybody else beats feet and goes to Philadelphia. These two stay. They were there for 14 months. March 1691, Governor Henry Slaughter shows up. What a perfect name for a guy who's going to kill the previous governor. He was also one of the chairmen of the piracy ring. He made his money over here. And Nicol was reappointed to the governor's council, named King's Council. And guess who tried Leisler? William Nicol. And Leisler was hung. They told England, and then the king said, "Oh, well, I forgave him." Oh, sorry about that. Where's his money? He didn't have any. Amazingly, Gardner, you go through all the names, Gardner, Gibbs, Nicol, the Willets, all suddenly have a lot of money, which apparently belonged to the governor. Amazing. Excellent lawyers. No, you can't prove any of this because they didn't write it down. Next slide. Now the Glorious Revolution comes. They are very, very close to remember the Nichols are very close to the crown. And they are very close to Mary II and William III. Then William takes over after his wife Mary dies. Remember, he's William of Orange. Comes over from Holland. It was kind of comical because England and Holland were at war. Suddenly a Dutchman was their king. So that solved that problem. England and Holland became allies. Mary, again, appoints Nicol to all sorts of things. Nicol winds up actually being a representative. We know he's up when the French attacked the forts on Albany. He's there and negotiating with the New England colonies to force them to pay for what New York is going through with the Indian raids and so forth. So he's very much part of the government. Let's go to the next slide. In 1695, he goes with Chidley Brooke with money and order to the crown to go find out and get the crown to give some more money toward defeating the French. What happens is they're in transit and they get captured. He almost dies in a French prison until they get him released. They did lose the money, but he was able to be at court for a while. And the London he came back to was a totally different London he left when he was 7 years old or when he was a captain in the army. London was now a place where they were burning coal instead of wood, and the communities the buildings had burned down, and they built a whole new city, and to him, it was amazing. Next slide. He's elected they decide they're going to have an elected assembly. He runs for the office of representative from the county of Suffolk. He is then not only elected, but he is also given the job of Speaker of the Assembly, which he will hold till his death. Only trouble is he's thrown out of the Assembly. See, there's one minor problem. He doesn't live in Suffolk. He lives in Plainville. And if he's not there, he's in the city. So the governor says, I can finally get rid of this annoying nickel. I'll go ahead and say, no, you can't be in the legislature. So he builds, our guess is he built this. And he says, see, I have a house. We don't know if he ever lived there, he probably didn't. But this is the nickel house as it appeared by the 19th century. It is in Exeter State Park. It's not there anymore, but foundations are. We've done a historic dig. I've got an entire attic full of boxes from the house. Next slide. He gets elected, finally, next year he gets elected again. By this time the governor can't throw him out. Lord Bellamont hates him, spends his entire time writing nasty letters to the king and queen, and later on Queen Anne, who happens to be a close friend of William Nicol. So that's not going anywhere. And William Kidd, of course, has his little bit of a problem over there and comes back, and eventually Lord Bellamont tries him, sends him to England. They figure all he's going to get is a slap on the wrist, it's over with. They forgot that the major person who paid for Captain Kidd's voyage was Charles II. And the royal and the rest of the crown was involved in it, and they decided to execute him, solve that problem, and that whole story about Gardner saying, oh my God, he's going to come back and take us and kill us all. Man, he was his business partner. Gardner took the money as well as Nicol and everybody else, so that solved that problem. He holds the speakers from 1702 till 1718. He controls the colony of New York. Little Islip is wagging the dog's tail, telling the dog what to do. Let's go to the next slide. Queen Anne, 1702, 1714. This is the Act of Union. This is the flag that will now fly over the town of Islip. This is a big thing because she is a big supporter of the Nicol family. Let's go to the next slide. William Nicol worried about the native tribes that lived on his land. People were stealing their land. So he deeded back. We are continually finding deeds that he gave them pieces of land back that couldn't be taken away. This particular thing is probably for what is Connecticut River State Park Preserve. This is probably from that area. We're pretty sure that's the area. And interestingly enough, on here, the witnesses. Benjamin Nicol is his son. Mary Nicol, a daughter. Mary Taylor, another relative. These are women signing a deed as witnesses in a time when the British women didn't have the right to do so in British thing. The Nicol girls did. Next slide. This is the Nicol genealogy. If you want a copy of this, we can make one. We've been able to resurrect these. Were done years ago by the town, and they basically go through all of the things. But please notice how easy it is to tell who's in charge of anything. Yeah. We know where he's buried, and he and his wife, and he's at St. John's Church. So if you ever want to tour St. John's, we'll show you their graves. His son William, who had William and William. Let's go to the next slide. You can spend hours on this. As far as we know, he probably owned about 55,000 acres of the land of the present town of Islip. It's back and forth how many acres are actually in the town. He could not break it up because it was under entailment, which meant it had to go to the oldest son until after New York ended the law of primogeniture. He was the one who wrote the act to end that. William Nicol wrote the act to end the primogeniture. We are now finding out that William Nicol, which many people have said is a Tory, turns out he's not. He's the only thing that he voted against in the assembly was to condemn the king. He could not condemn a family friend. And otherwise he supported everything. We are now suspicious that he was one of the sources from what we're seeing in stuff that's being turned up. He was one of the sources of what's going on because there was a raid on his home. If this was a real raid, these were the worst raiders ever because they stole ridiculous things. So it's obviously a cover-up. Something was going on. And why would that William Nickel, not the same one, that William Nickel, be elected the town supervisor right afterwards? In any case, family remains active in politics. They are responsible for the very slow growth of Islip Town. Islip Town was the last town to develop. In fact, the major development of Islip Town doesn't occur till the 1970s. You guys were in there early, but most of the development in most of the town fell through the roof. It never got anywhere, just because you couldn't get here from there. Let's go to the next thing. The Nickel family, they are the consummate survivors. Changes in kings and queens, and others who were better connected fell. They did not. They survived numerous changes of governors, which around here was common. Come to think of it, it still is. Engineered and maintained very high positions and managed to keep themselves out of trouble. They controlled not only Islip, but also Queens County, Suffolk County, Brookhaven, Smithtown, and Shelter Island. And in spite of the best efforts of Huntington, Brookhaven, Smithtown governors, the state, the crown, the United States government, and lawsuits, Islip Town exists. It was their gift to us. Let's go to the next slide. So when were we founded? All right. When was the town established? I had more fun with this. We do this a lot of times in libraries. 1683, 1684, 1700, 1710, or 1720? None of the above. First land purchase is 1683. The land purchase is confirmed in 1684, and then he gets more of the patents. Why is this important? It's important to you. Royal patents indicate that no other claim can be made on the land. That is the major, that's it. Once that's done, you have clear title. Each of the patents contains something. How many people here go out saltwater fishing? You have your saltwater license? No, you don't. You have a little ID card, right?
Okay.
Right, instead of the $70 license that every other state charges, there's a reason for that. You own the water. The federal government and the state do not own the water, thanks to William Nickel. When they went to court, the Obama administration said, oh, we're going to get that money because we'll split it with the state. They brought Charles II in, who sat down and testified, and that ended it. Because it says right in the patent, you own it, and they turned the patents over to you. So that solves that problem. They hang together in 1700. The governor is screaming, I don't know what you're doing out there, but you're not doing what I want you to do. They ignore him. In 1710, they write a law. William Nickel wrote the law. It says, Islip must have a government if it wants it. Honest to God. It's exactly what this guy is one of the greatest legal minds of all time. You can't enforce this thing. So let's look at the next slide. What did they do? They waited until 1720 because everything was being run in everybody's living room. What did they need a government for besides what they were doing? They'd have to punish themselves. So the few landowners who could vote, the freeholders, finally got together forming a government. Amazingly, the 5 members of the government, we still have 5 members of the town board today, were all relatives of the Nickel family, or the other members who were also relatives of the Nickel family. But we were a precinct, a voting precinct. We didn't have to keep town records, which is good because they didn't. So we have no birth and death records like other towns. We have no marriage records because they weren't a town. The use of the word Town of Islip does not begin until after the state of New York declared us a town, March 7, 1788. Go to the next slide. The surrounding towns were just a little surprised. Brookhaven found out that it didn't own Islip. Smithtown was wondering how that happened. By the way, the reason Smithtown never made a claim, and we'll talk about this in a minute, was because William Nickel married his daughter off to Bull Smith's oldest son. Nickel then started controlling Smithtown, solved that problem. And Huntington was extremely surprised because they thought they had the Willits land and the bay, which they lost. So basically, the 5 families ran this town until the 19th century. You look in the town records, it's the same gang. The town hall for Islip was a box, a writing box. They didn't buy that till 1850. It cost money. All town business was done in somebody's home. We are still getting stuff delivered to town record center that people find that people have in their houses that says Islip Town Clerk. How did I get this? Oh yeah, your relative was an old town official. That's how it got there. We don't even have a town hall until 1870. They didn't know what to do with it because, you see, they've been meeting once a year in a lodge store, which also happened to have an important word after it. Our town minutes are interesting. They actually met only in bar rooms. Huntington's records for the same period of time are 3 volumes this wide. Islip's things are this big, printed. That's it. There is nothing else. Let's go to the next slide. Let's see what it might have looked like. This is the south, this is not the South Road, but it's back road on Islip Range. This is what South Road looked like from 1915. You know South Road is Montauk Highway. Yeah, they found out that somebody finally said, are you going to pave the road? And they said, you know, it costs money. Well, we've been paying money for paving the road. Oh, okay, you wanted it paved. All right, we'll start. The only paved road for a long while was in front of the Bourne Mansion in Oakdale because Mr. Bourne got tired of eating soup with dust in it. So he went out and macadamized the road. So everybody came. But this is what it looked like in Oakdale at the age of it. So it doesn't look too much different. We can go see it today. Let's go to the next slide. The grist mill in Connecticut River State Park Preserve, they completely restored that. If you haven't had a chance to see it operating, it's amazing. It's a tub mill. It was built 1697 to 1751, and it served the town. This is the original Montauk Highway right here. And it's paved in the park of all things. Let's go to the next slide. This is the church, the only church until 1840 in the entire town. Everybody went to church outside of town. This is St. John's Church today. This is what it looked like in 1765. It was built for that William Nichol's wife. She never got to see it. She died just before it was completed. And they say the original service was a memorial service for her because there's no way to get a casket in this place. So today it had this addition added in 1843, this extra bay. And back of it is the 5th most significant stained glass window in the United States. It's a medieval French window, which is something to see. It has, the reason they put it in there, all the elements in it are in the Islip Town seal. Have the next slide, please.
Where is that church?
Oakdale.
Yeah.
December 14th is Civil War Christmas at St. John's, and it's from 3 o'clock and it ends with a Civil War evening service, Christmas service at 7 o'clock. And you get to see the church. It's open, full of greens. It looks exactly like it did when the Nickel family worshipped there. Washington visits Islip in 1790. He stays at Saginaw Coast Manor. He sees the grist mill. He sees St. John's Church. He stays at the greenhouse. Nobody knows whether the green had an E after it or not. There's a big argument about that. The big thing Islip has, this is in West Salem. It's right across from the firehouse. George Washington wrote down he stopped to water the horses. In other words, our founding father stopped to use the outhouse. We are the only place that could, that's true story, we're the only place that could say that in the United States. Let us, they all still exist. Yeah. Next slide. First half of the 19th century, it's an era of recreation. The only thing is that this town survived on is recreation. And I know one of the first things that when you came in, I forgot who it was, is talking about the casino, thinking there's gambling going on. No, it was a place for dancing and dining. It's not a gambling parlor. Though there was plenty of that going on in this town too, but that was not there. Let's take a look at the next slide. The manors are now being broken up. The nickel grants had already sold off to some families like the Bayards. And biggest thing was that people go hunting and fishing here. Now, one of the things in the colonial time and into the middle of the 19th century, remember those hogs I mentioned? They got loose, and this place was overrun with pigs. So what happened was they went ahead and basically had everybody hunt them. That's how they got rid of it. They ate their way out of it. That was the only way they could do it. Pigs were everywhere. They destroyed everything in town. This area here was overrun with them. Let's go to the next slide. This, of course, Southside Sportsman's Club in 1866. They buy out the former Snedecor Inn, and now it's a sportsman's paradise, and that's how we made it. That's how we survived. It's one of the reasons Ackerson looked at this, because it's a sportsman's paradise, one of the advertisements. Let's go to the next slide. The coming of the railroad. Now, the Long Island Railroad came through in 1840. 1840s or so. They could care less about Town of Islip. They didn't even bother to have stations, and they eventually put some in. Their idea was to go to Boston. But the South Side Railroad came through and actually served portions of where there were people. Nobody lived in the middle of the whole place, except for a few people. Let's go to the next slide. These are not M1s, they are earlier trains, but this is what a train would look like coming through. This is one of the South Side trains. By the way, the fares were the same as they are today. I am not kidding you. When you work out the fare that they give, we worked it out, and it's $23 to $27, which is basically what it is today, one way. So, yeah, nothing changes. Let's have it the next slide. This is the population. Please notice the influence the Nichols had on the population. Oh, look what happened here. Anybody want to guess why we suddenly had a lot more people? Central Islip State Hospital doubled the population of the town. Next slide. This is the Town of Islip with all of its wonderful school districts. Many of them later on, they were town school districts, later on became union free, which violated every law in the New York State books, but that's what they did. Next slide. And here's the seal. October 12th, 1883, we get a town seal. Please go to the next slide. Here's where it comes from. This is in Henry VII's Lady Chapel, which was built by Thomas Islip of Islip, North Hampshire. This is how he signed his name. I cut part of a tree, slip, and there's the him in the middle of it. That's his signature. Let's go to the next slide. This is the town seal in its real meaning. It's a rebus, I, slips, slip. The one on the right, on the left side, looking at it, is Huntington. There's no Babylon. Babylon doesn't exist until 1872, and that Islip helped that along. It has real roots because Huntington had a legal claim on the town of Islip, and they lost it in court. Smithtown has a short branch because it's a smaller area, but no roots because they never made a claim. On the original art, Brookhaven, you kind of see it here, its roots are tangled and balled up. They have root ball because Brookhaven actually did have the land and lost it. So it's a joke. It was meant to be a joke because it's an I slip on the part of Brookhaven and Huntington. The town supervisor, Colonel Treadwell Scudder, there's the name Treadwell again, spelled a totally different way than the other Treadwells. Treadwell Scudder is an I slip on the part of Brookhaven and Huntington. And the date is not the date of the founding of the town, it's the first purchase. It sounded better, because all the other towns were founded in 1683, so we had to get it done somehow. And the town motto is have confidence, but be careful in whom you confide. In other words, trust but verify. So that is our Islip Town Seal. It is a joke. It is meant to be a joke. The letter makes a lot of fun of everybody. We have the original letter, copy of the letter. It is comical when you read it because it is also one of the Thompsons out of Saginaw Coast Manor. Next slide. And it's only the beginning of the story. I know I went on long, I always do, but hopefully you've enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, that place, that was called the Grange in West Islip on Higley Lane, was that an original old building from?
Part of it, well, what you see now is probably what it looked like in colonial days. Everything else was added to over the years. So what you see now is probably the original, because you go up in there, you can see the original house inside. But that is an original colonial building, it's just kind of put in a different angle because that had fit on the lot. But at least we still have it.
Mhm.
We have a lot of colonial houses and stuff. One of the big things happening in beginning of November, first few days of November, is the Dutch public television is coming over here to video West Saddle. The feature is because it's one of the Dutch enclaves in the United States. They didn't know we existed until somebody saw a racing video and saw the Flying Dutchman go by. And they go, wow, I wonder where these people are from. And they contacted us and we sent them tons of information, overloaded the Dutch, and hopefully they can read English. But anyway, yeah. Any other questions?
Who was the Flying Dutchman?
Who is the Flying?
What one?
It's the name of the race. The people made fun of the West Saddle Dutch, so the racing team made up an emblem, which was a Dutch golden Dutch shoe with a blue wing, and they called the racing team the Flying Dutchman. But it comes from, of course, the original Flying Dutchman is an old story, but actually at sea, it's when you're in a fog, and I've had it happen where you think you're going to collide with another ship, and it's you. It's reflection in the fog. So, that's where the story comes from. I've actually had that happen. Woke the captain up, he was not happy. Any other?
Is that the date they have the
West Fire Department, that is our name, there it is, shoot, that shoot. But,
The information on the events that you have mentioned, how did we get that out to the residents of Brightwaters?
All right,
Mary Kate, that we can.
it goes, Mary Kate, are you getting the e-blast from Chris?
Yeah.
You can send them out to everybody, she gets them, Chris gets them, he sends them, e-blasts go out to everybody, and Mary Kate, you get them so you can blast it out to everybody, including everything in it, and make sure that the town, so people can go to these things. As I said, the next big town event is they do have the Apple Fest, which I try to stay away from, because it's a monstrosity. But we will be having the Civil War Christmas, and then we start in June again with Living History Day, which hopefully you guys can be one of the tents there. And then we have Civil War Weekend, which is always in the middle weekend of September, where we get a lot of people there. So it's a really nice event. Yes?
The church that's part of the Grange, where the Apple Festival.
Yes. That is a 3/5 reproduction of the original Dutch Reformed Church built in 1870. If you want to see the original church, it's real easy. You stand in the West Saddle Fire Department parking lot, look directly north, and there's a spa, which now my wife goes there and I can't remember the name of it, because I buy her presents from there. Anyway, there's a spa there, and the first floor is the foundation, which they built a special foundation, and then they jacked the building up, and the church sits on top of it. So the building there is the church, and it was a home, one of the Dutch families bought it and made it a home, because the church, like a lot of buildings in the town of Islip, they build them with wheels on them. We have found buildings that people thought were lost in Bayshore. One of the members of the Bayshore Historical Society found the original farmhouse from Bayshore, what he thought was long lost. Turns out that it wasn't lost, it was only moved 3 times. The people living in it thought they were in a modern home, and when they opened the walls up, they realized this isn't a modern house. So yeah, and we've had a couple of those, and like many of the buildings that were part of downtown West Sable, joke that is, still are sitting there and they're behind. They moved them, the old A&P is still there, the old building. They just renovated into fancy apartments. But you never know where things are. They just pop up, literally. The original railroad station in Bayport is still there. It's a lawyer's office, much to the surprise of the lawyer who bought it. And it's now got a plaque in front of it. Long Island Railroad was cheap. But it was a store. But a lot of this stuff, and I will be willing to bet there are things here in Brightwaters that weren't here. They just showed up because it was cheaper around here. The cost of building materials was expensive. So they would, if they could recycle something or rebuild something, they would do it. And believe me, they moved some of these buildings in the 1840s mileage that we could never move. You have no idea what these crazy.
Floated houses down there, you know.
Right, they floated houses down the canal. And we do know that a large number of buildings especially in eastern Islip town, the buildings are not where they originally were. And like the original West Sable Firehouse still exists. It's the American Legion Hall in Sable. And the joke is always we send everything we don't need to Sable, including our dead bodies, because they all go to Union Cemetery. So, our gas station